where it all started. We were coming down, you see the Dreiherrenspitze, the three-master peak over there, and you see the glacier. And as we came down, there was a terrible thunderstorm with torrential rainfalls. Over there at the glacier, there's nowhere to hide, so we were soaked. And that's when our mountain guide, Paul Rieder, all of a sudden said, well, almost laughingly, all right, we're soaked, but at least we've got good shoes. But the Jews, and then he would point over there. Over there, you see, over there you will see another pass, and that's the Kremltauern Pass. And then he would say, the Jews who crossed over there, they didn't even have good shoes. And that's when I was thunderstruck and decided, well, this can't be true. But he said, yes. There are pictures at the Kremltauern Lodge, so go and look at them. And of course, I just had to go there, and that was the start of my research. It was all true, and it was right there and then that I resolved I will not allow that this will remain forgotten, because that's where I grew up here at Tellemsee. I'd never heard in school, and that's when I decided to start. In 2007, 3 or 4 years later, the first Alpine Peace Crossing, 60 years after they escaped. In 2 years will be 70 years in remembrance of the Jewish exodus over the Austrian Alps, and it will also be 10 years of Alpine Peace Crossing. So a double joyous occasion. The tour guide, Victor Knopf, he was absolutely fantastic. 3,000 out of the 5,000 or so refugees who crossed over, he single-handedly led them. And he would go back and forth. So he was absolutely wonderful, Victor Knopf. And they would start at maybe 5 in the afternoon, and by the time they reached the mountain pass, it was midnight. And of course, pitch dark.
Monika.
Jahre jung. Danke, Marco. And then it all fell into place, the terrible pogrom of Kielce in Poland and the Jewish exodus, the Polish Jewish exodus of 46. And then in 47, when the French, who were the forces in Tyrol, wouldn't let any Jews pass through the Tyrol, because originally they could go still over the Brenner Pass. It was then that they had to cross over there, over the mountains, where the American zone touched in a 10-kilometer stretch directly onto Italy. So that's where they crossed, and then it was Marco Feingold, and I'm sure you have him in the picture. He had scouted that trail, and that's where Liesl Geisel, the wonderful innkeeper, looked after the children at the Criminal Town Lodge. And altogether it was 15 hours, grueling. And then down there in the valley it was Kazan, and that's where they would arrive maybe at 3 or 4 in the morning, totally exhausted. And they were not allowed to use any lights, nothing, because they did not want to make any noises or draw attention to the Carabinieri. They were afraid that they would be turned back. One small assistance came in the way of those little beautiful horses, the Haflinger horses, and actually at the Kremler Bauernhaus they have their own small museum. They still have not a replica, the original of the actual baskets which were placed over the backs of those horses, so that some rucksacks or some small children could be placed there in a blanket, and so those horses would carry them pretty much to the not quite to the top, but close to the top of the Criminal Tower Pass. The summer of 1947 was a fairly dry summer, but there was snow as well. And can you imagine? They were crossing the snow with children and at night stumbling. How they did it, how can we guess?
Könnt ihr aufwächsen, jetzt zusammen auf.
Keiner. Wart nur ein bisschen so kurz. See, and you can read it here in Italian and in German and in English. What it is that they might have felt, and we called it relief here. Here, when the Carabinieri would let them through, they were happy, but they had the treacherous descent still ahead of them, 1,000 meters vertical drop, and it was only 4 hours after this particular point up here that they could finally arrive in Kazan. This was a smuggling path, and so the carabinieri and the financieros from the customs office, they were stationed up here to catch the smugglers. And in 1947, since the British did not want any further Jewish people in Palestine, they were leaning on the Italians and on the French not to let anyone through. And that's why the Jewish refugees of 1947 were afraid that the Carabinieri would turn them back. It was joyous in the end because no one perished coming over here. So you're going on a very historical path. I give it to you. Have a look. Have a look. And then in the pyramids you will see what happened in 1947. And the Bricha, I take my hat off. That's when they took care of them, and those who were weak and needed care were taken to a rehab in Merano, and others would then be taken to a boat in Genoa, elsewhere, to come closer to the Herzl dream of a Jewish state. It was still Palestine then, and the rest is history. Unfortunately, they had to hold out another year in Cyprus, still another camp, until they could finally legally enter into the state of Israel in 48. Before then, as we all know, it was not the finest hour of the British. As far as we know, those that crossed over here at Krimmel, they eventually ended up, and they have to be credited in building up Israel, the new nation.